uh, this is a little bit introduction of about myself. Today is my first session on Dynamics 365 Saturdays. So um, my name is Fahad Ahmed. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I work with Hitachi Solutions as a technical architect. I've been working with Dynamics, AX, and FinOps for over 3 years now in various technical roles. I do write blogs sometime. So here's my blog site, dynamicsonline.com, where I try to cover various topics related to Dynamics overall ecosystem. So agenda for today is, CI/CD, configuring automated builds and deployments with FNO. It's a pretty hot topic these days. So I'll go into the need of it, especially in AX world or FNO world. And I will, during the session, I'll be switching the windows. I will be switching towards, switching to the browser window and my VMs, just to show you a little bit, try to go a little bit deep into, okay, how I configured it for my personal environments, how we run it. At the end, we will actually get into a little bit hiccups because the deployment part is something which I couldn't completely flesh out on my personal environment. And obviously I couldn't show my client environment. So, but I have the setup done. We will walk through it and we'll see what things are needed. All right. So I don't exactly know the format of it, but I think we can ask questions in the window and from time to time, and I will look at the window and try to answer those questions. But I'll try to have some time available at the end to answer questions. All right, so the automated builds. I remember I was on a project 3 years ago, and that was the X2012 project. And that was my first project where our team decided to do the Agile or Scrum-based implementation. And I was very excited about it because I have worked with Agile processes in the past. But during that time, I was working as a developer on a product development, not on an implementation. So I was also a little bit skeptical. But what I realized is that the first thing is what's missing is a good ALM story, a good, even I was not aware about this term CI/CD at that time, but I knew that, okay, there has to be something to build it as soon as the project is, that the code is, checked in, and then make sure that you are not breaking the build. Because when I was working as a developer with Microsoft as a vendor, there we had a gated check-in concept. We had nightly bills. We had weekly bills, and all those sort of things to make sure that the build is perfect before we actually move to the next phase. So in on the client side, we were missing that. So we ended up writing some PowerShell scripts to create some model stores or build a model stores, and then move the model store to, build environment to another environment and things like that. So now, since Microsoft have released certain tools in DevOps, which we're going to explore in a bit, this task has become quite easy. Configure it. You have the resources available. You can procure the resources on the cloud and make that happen. So as more and more organizations are getting into this agile-based processes, and I'm saying agile-based processes because there's no, I would say, a perfect process. You always adapt as per need. At Hitachi, we are adapting. We have already adapted agile-based implementation process across all of our business verticals. So this is quite key in the future world. The benefits that we get is obviously build acceptance. You can catch the builds early enough in your development process. You can catch the errors. You can catch, usually I don't expect developers checking in code without building it or compiling it, but believe me, there are many other things that we want to catch early enough. You don't want to deal with at the end of your sprint cycle, because usually what happens is that if you have a 2 weeks or 3 weeks of sprint, you are writing the code, and In many cases, you check in your code at the end of your sprint. And at that time, if you do not have a good process to catch those, you could easily miss the time window, actually. I would even say that we should have a kind of weekly check-in, or at least couple of times check-ins in the week, and have a nightly build process. Then build verification, to make sure that whatever new features we are adding are not uh, breaking the existing, kind of regression testing. So we have certain tools available now to kind of integrate it with the build process. Um, Obviously, we don't want to test each and everything, but we should be able to identify as a team, as an implementation team, or as a project team, to identify very high level processes which are key to the business, and write um, some tests for that, for UI tests for that. And obviously, it reduces manual work, uh, enhance the chances of errors. So I will start with the setup and configuration. And while doing that, since I've already done it, so, but I will try my best to go into the tools like DevOps and LCS and try to show you, okay, where we need to do what. But at the same time, we can start a build so that it starts running. And by the time we are at some, demo level or some level where we can see the things, we have at least one build done. Usually it takes 15-20 minutes. So let me start with that. So what I'm going to do is, without showing you anything, I'm just going to do a check-in. Hopefully I have it set up. So I have created a project. It's a small project. It has small extension to add a particular custom field on, I think, on a sales order line or a purchase order line. I want to take a look. I kind of forgot. But I created a separate model. So you have to have a separate for any implementation. This is not the topic, but I'm just telling that your model strategy is very important. How you want to package your code and promote it and actually release it to your client. So make sure that you have a right model created for that, and you have all the references. And obviously, as you continue to build your code, add extensions. I'm not using the word customizations anymore. Extensions, you will continue to add references to your model. So it's going to take a little bit time. I don't know, I should have opened it earlier. But anyways, while it's opening, we can talk about uh, the change that I've done. I actually deleted a file, which I'm going to check in, and that would actually trigger the build. So the way it's configured, so this is my DevOps. I created a DevOps project for today's session, and we can just investigate the repository. I've created a TFS version repository, not the Git. I'm not super knowledgeable, or still learning about Git, but I found TFS working great with all the dynamics-based development, FNO-based development. So this is what we do. I mean, I created only one branch. Obviously, depending on your release strategy, you can have multiple branches. So I created a model, as I said, D365 Saturday. I checked in it already. The extension has already been checked in. And this is a project there. And this version control, or this source, this repository actually has already been configured on this dev environment. And I have some changes. I should be able to see some changes which I made yesterday in my pending changes window. And let me just put a comment. check-in this. So there is no get it check-ins. The check-in will just go away without any compilation or any build. And I've noticed that we can configure that. I haven't. I don't have to, because usually if you are building it right away after the check-in, that's doing the same thing. So if the build gets failed, I will get an email. Okay, so this is my repository. Let me go to the pipelines now real quick. So this is my build pipeline. You can see that one build is triggered just now. And we can click on it and see what's happening with it. So these are some of the tasks. We will investigate these tasks in a bit. But these are some of the steps that are happening within this build process. It's running. It's doing several things. We can come back to this window to investigate where it is, and if there's a failure, what is the failure, how to see the logs. Now going back to our setup part. So I already talked about, yes, we have to have a DevOps project. So let me try to follow this. So first we will set up a project. We need to have a DevOps project with code repository. We just looked at it. Later, after that, we would need to configure the LCS with DevOps project. I'll show you in a bit. We will have a setup. We will have a build and test environment configured, and then we'll create the build definition. So this is what is needed for the build configuration. So it's happening here. So let's talk about LCS. LCS is open here. So let me just go back to my personal project. So I have basically three environments, but these two environments I'm currently using. Both of these environments are tier 1 environments. This is my dev environment, and this is my build environment, where currently the build is running. Excuse me. So once you have your DevOps project set up, you need to connect that with your LCS. Right now it's already connected, but let's say if it's not, you will be asked to provide the DevOps URL. And after that, you will be asked to provide your personal access token, which you can generate from when you are in your DevOps. You can generate your personal access token from here. So I've already generated one and used one, but I can generate another if I have to. But you can generate a token. It will give you a token which you can copy, and later on you can just go into your LCS and provide it. And the rest of the things is quite simple. You will just continue, click through the screens, and this will be set up for you. So that's quite easy. I haven't find any issues with that. So your project is configured with it. You have the repository. Now the third thing is to create a build environment. So if you already have a build environment, that's great. If not, you could create a build environment. And one thing that I really want to show or mention here is, just for the sake of learning, let's try to create an environment. I won't create it. I already have 3, and I have a limited budget. So just show you what you should do. So this is build and test. So when you come to this screen, you should always select build and test. You select your subscription, and you can give any name. In advanced settings, you need to give some name, some build agent name. This name will be used in your DevOps. So if you are setting up your build environment, if you provide the build agent name and select the build and test environment, after this environment is spun up, you will see that it's already integrated with your build definition on DevOps. We'll take a look in a bit. So you will see that everything that you need on a build environment is configured for you, is installed for you there. So what I found is that in this folder, there are some build definitions, there are some PowerShell scripts, uh, there are certain other agent-specific information, which obviously is too codey for me, but this is already there for you. Obviously, if I need to look at, I can go into the PowerShell script and see, okay, what I want to change or what it's doing. But the good thing is that what are the steps needed? It's already there, the template. It's configured for you. So that's the build configuration. Once the build environment is set up, as I said, you will have everything there. And then after that, you will see that on your pipeline, you will see one default pipeline created for you. Right now it's running. That's why it's showing you a blue wheel kind of thing. But we can still investigate it by clicking edit. And all of these tasks, which are part of the template, are automatically created for you. Now you can change a variety of things here. First of all, you will find these three groups of properties in every task. Um, it gives you certain options. For example, if you want to enable or disable it, there may be some steps that you want to disable. For example, I have disabled the deployment of reports, just to see whether it's deploying or not. I mean, usually we should deploy the reports if we have any reports. But I just disable it to see if it's going into the process. You could probably want to disable tests if you don't want to test. So that's the purpose of this control. You can continue on error. I I always find it, it's disabled by default. In some steps it's enabled, but I always disable because I really want to see, okay, why something has happened. There may be some steps which you can ignore, but right now I feel like, okay, this should be disabled for all the steps. These are output variables. So output variables is, think about them as a class level variable or something that you can share within your code. Similarly, in the build process, if you want to share some information from one step to another, or from from one pipeline to another pipeline, you can define some variables. There's a whole format of defining them to retrieve some values in there, and then use them in the later pipeline or later stages if you need to. So far, I found that the default template that we receive is pretty much good for generating everything for us. That's where the packages will be created. Let's see where the packages. Once the build is successful, your packages will be created in this directory. Okay, and this directory is basically on your build environment. This is not the build environment. Give me 1 second. Right. So you'll go to Dynamics SDK, this, and here under each release, you will see a package is created. These are some successful builds that I created over the last 2-3 days. You will find 2 packages. One is just the runtime, another one with the model source. I think if you are doing development with D365 FinOps, you understand this thing. The runtime is just the runtime. It does not contain the code, and this contains the code. So that's it. All right. So anyway, let's see where our build is. While generating the build, it always gives the check-in. Since I integrated it with the check-in, so it picks up the comment of 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 the check-in. Database sync is happening. As you guys are aware that this is a part of every build, whether you do it even in the past with the X2012, we used to do the database sync of all the table changes. So it's going to take a little bit more time. But anyways, while it's happening, let's just move to the next steps. Any questions so far? Let me see. Nothing. All right. So we set up if DevOps project, model repository. I created these, slides just to make sure that if something happens with the demo, I have something to show you. This is configuration of LCS and DevOps. We just did it. This is of creating a build and test environment. Now talk about the automated test while it's running. That's the next part, automated tests. So automated tests are really, really important. And we need to find the right balance because we don't want to test each and everything. As we are going into the future and looking into this one version thing that like evergreen version, we're getting updates every month, every other month. Recently I found this thing, automated tests have become quite important because think about if you're working with a big organizations and you have spent quite a bit of time to implement this ERP on their business processes. I think, in my opinion, we should make it part. We means our partner community, the integrators, the implementers. We should make it part of our process to um, communicate to our clients to ensure that they understand the importance of tests, especially automated tests. And you have seen that Microsoft has invested in the last couple of years on this. We already have sys-test framework. We have been writing unit tests since AX2012, or even before that. And that's really good, actually. You can unit test your what do you call it, the business logic. In the past, there was a framework to do UI tests or write UI tests in C Sharp, but that framework was quite heavy. It was more like a Selenium type test where you have everything open on a computer. And if you remember AX2012, there was a thick client that was heavy, and it, for a big build, it usually take more than 24 hours just to run the test. And if something fails, to figure out where the problem is, whether it's in the test or is it really a breaking a code or breaking a functionality, it was also additional effort. So, but moving forward, as we see now, we have some tasks recorder-based UI tests available. We have RSet tool. I didn't mention that because I don't know whether we can configure RSet with build. But RSet is there. RSet is a little bit heavy, but other than uh, if you compare it with toxic recorder-based UI test, but it's still there. So we need to look into our testing strategy. Even after when we are done with the implementation, we need to communicate this to our client and tell them, hey, Microsoft is releasing this new versions every other month, for example, and we have a very small cycle where you will have the support, and you really want to upgrade or update at least twice in an year. So we should look into automating very key test scenarios, very high level test scenarios, or very important test scenarios for you, so that whenever we upgrade, we run those scenarios just to make sure those are not breaking, and we can avoid some of the work, um, the manual work that we might have to do just to test those, just to accept the bills, just to accept the updates that we are getting. So that's really important. Although the chances are very less because of the extension-based um, approach now. We are not customizing, we are not modifying any code, uh, but still, I would say that it's a good practice to test your code, your extensions. So in our builds, it looks like it's done, right? So the build process has been finished. You notice that it probably took 15 minutes or less, 12 minutes actually. And for the first time, it will take more time. I mean, if you run it like after just configuring your environment, it may take 40, 45 minutes. But after that, I noticed that depending on the code and everything, it's roughly between 15, 20 minutes. And if you want to run additional things in there. So after it's finished, we can go into the release. So how we did it, so let me just step back. So we have this available. All of these things, branches were automatically configured for us. Uh, when I was looking at it, I probably changed only this step. I looked into the publish artifacts things where I want to see the things. The pipelines, I want to talk about a little bit that. And what else? Copy files. These are the logs, right? So after you configure this, you need to identify your triggers. So if you go into the triggers menu, you will see that there is this option which this is unchecked by default. I checked it just to enable it as soon as I check in the code. You can disable it if you're working with a big development team and check-ins are happening all over, and obviously it's going to take some resources and time, and so it's better to schedule it. So I just also have a schedule. So you can have both things running together. You can have continuous integration also with some schedule. You can say, okay, I want to run it every day. It's quite simple. You can define the time zone and everything, and then it runs every day and without even telling you, and if whether it's successful, whether it fails, it gives you these emails also. So by default, you get emails um, on in your Outlook if you are a build administrator. You can control that notifications as well in DevOps. You can click on the view results and it takes you to this screen if there are any warnings. Um, I want to see, I remember, okay, so download logs. So this gives you the logs. And then I changed one thing yesterday, and that's actually, so you will notice that I did not get the generated build here. Instead, I'm getting the build in this folder somewhere. And the reason for that, I'll explain to you in a bit. Yeah, so there I get the build, the folder. So the reason for that is I actually changed it to, so there are two options. One is you can leave it as it is, and you can have your build available in your build environment, and then you can copy them manually, or you want to move, your generated package to a next step in your pipeline. Like in this case, we wanted to move this package to the deployment part. Now we are getting into the deployment. But before we get there, let me make sure that I cover everything regarding the build. So we talked about the tests. These tests can be integrated. I haven't done it. I know that once you so they have the all the PowerShell scripts created in your build. When you set up your build, you have all the PowerShell scripts created here. Uh, it it actually get the DLL files from your version control. So the way you have to do it is you have to create first UI tests using your task recorder. Those UI tests uh, will be you will provide those UI tests to a UI tool in Dynamics that gives you that generates the form adapter files, which are actually I didn't cover that because this was not part of it, but I'm just telling you that you can find that. You can Google that. I will provide the link. This is all mentioned in the documentation, like how to generate a UI test. So that will give you a C# file, which you can build, you can run in Visual Studio, and at the end, you will have a DLL file that can be picked up in this test setup. You don't even have to do that. I mean, this setup, what I found is that it's just telling you where the PS file, which is already there configured for you. What you need to do is in your version control, you need to check in those files so that every time when the build is there, this setup actually detects that and run it as part of your build. So uh, so you can look into that if you want to integrate it. But this is quite important. I haven't done it. I didn't have a chance to do it, but this is something easily doable. Now, the build execution, we talked about build executions, how to configure it on the schedule, and how to do it as at every time as check-in. You can also enable gated check-ins. You've probably seen the option there. Once the build executes, you get that in your build folder, and that's it. Now let's move into the deployment part. Okay, give me 1 second. All right. So for deployment, we're gonna set up the release pipeline, and Microsoft has released 2 tasks last year in 2019. Um, one for uploading the package to the asset library, because if people are doing here code promotion, you are already aware that how we do it. You create a package, we upload it into the asset library. Uh, Asset library validates that, and then you apply it on your next environment. Uh, that task does not support we have 2 tasks. One is to upload it to the asset library, that is Azure DevOps task, and the other one is to actually apply it to an environment. And that apply task, or actually apply the package, does not support production environment. And obviously, because we only want to do it on the test. And once we make sure that this is a release candidate, we can mark it as a release candidate and create a ticket for Microsoft support to apply it. So that's there. So let's just go into the release pipeline to see how would that work. I go into the release. I created a release pipeline here. Just create new. So when you create it, it asks you to select a template, and you will find a lot of templates. So obviously I said, okay, let me just search for Dynamics. I couldn't find anything. I said, all right, what should I do? So I said empty. I start with the empty, and I said, all right, let's just give it a name. It asks you, okay, I have only one folder, so I'm just putting it there. close it. So this is our pipeline. Okay, so before we actually configure the stages, so this is a stage, we need to add an artifact, which means, okay, where should this pipeline start? So we want to start it as soon as the build is finished, right? And we already have a build pipeline. You can have multiple build pipelines, and you can have multiple release pipelines. So depending on your SDLC, your ALM, you could decide, okay, how you want to do it. So I just selected my build, and here you have option to select, specific version or latest version. Let's say, you are releasing only a specific version. You can create your specific release pipeline only for that version. There may be a situation like, okay, you just want to release one version to 2 or 3 environments in your environments. Uh, so you could create your own, but usually we always go with the latest one. So that's it. You just say, okay, whenever this release pipeline starts, it should get the input from the build. Now it should get the input. Whether when it should get the input, it's basically, again, you want to continuous deploy trigger. So this actually enable to trigger this pipeline as soon as your build is successful. Okay, so I will just do that. Every time when you save it, it asks for your comments. Doesn't matter which stage you are in or which artifact you are setting up, because obviously it's basically for the history, for making sure that who changed it and why changed it. Now, now we have to configure the agent. So this is our first stage. This is the artifacts who trigger it, and this is our first stage. You can have multiple stages in your pipeline. So here on this stage, I want to add a task. When you click on the stage, you have an option to add a task. And here you will see a variety of Azure DevOps tasks. Well, let me just search for LCS. I think that's what they named it. Right. So we have asset upload tasks, and we have asset deployment. So let me just say, okay, I want to do asset upload. When you click on it, you will find certain fields which are required, which you need to fill up. LCS connection. LCS connection is definitely, you need to tell this task where you want to upload this package which you are retrieving from the build. So I already have one created, but if you don't, you can add a new. It will ask for you basic authentication. You will need an application ID, which is your Azure application ID. If you don't know how to do it, you could go into portal.azure.com and app registration. So I have created many apps here, which the purpose of this app is just to just to provide authentication to different services that I'm using. So I think for this, I created this. So this is the client ID. This is the application client ID that you need. And that's it. You just provide that information. Service connection name. I don't think I provided that. Oh, that's just a name. Okay, you can give any name. And that's it. So once you add it, you can select your LCS connection. After that, you can provide your LCS project ID. Okay. How to get the LCS project ID? This is, I don't know if Microsoft have made it visible on all projects yet, but it should be. If it's not, then I'll tell you. Okay, so this is your LCS project ID. If you open up any LCS project, you will see that your URL points to a unique number. So that is your LCS project ID. You can provide that. Files to upload. Okay, this is which file you want to do. So this is the artifacts. You configured your build. You want to say, okay, I always want to go with this folder. asset name, you can define your asset name. I usually leave it blank so that I get the same asset name, which is there. Obviously, we want to enable it. That's pretty much it. Okay, once you save it, and by the way, it also generates the YAML file. The YAML is a format similar to JSON to define your tags. So a whole documentation available to understand what is Microsoft YAML and why and how it is used to configure certain steps in your build and deployment. So you can always, I mean, whatever the values you're setting up is actually going into behind the scene file, and that file is being used by Azure environments, Azure Cloud to apply that into your environments. So this is one task. Now you can add another stage to say deploy. And similarly, there is an agent, and you need to add an agent. The task would be asset deployment. Similarly, you will provide the LCS connection name and the LCS project ID. Now, this is your environment ID. It could be tier 2 or tier 1. You can apply the packages on any. You can find that ID on your environment page. I do not have a tier 2 environment to show you, or even I cannot use any environment right now to do it, but just giving you the steps. You can use that. You can go into your environment and find out that ID. Provide that asset ID. Oh, okay. So that's for that. I need to. For now, I'm just putting any junk here. I'll come back to it. Okay, let's go back to here. So let me go back to my other pipeline. Upload.file asset ID. So you could give any name here. Actually, I was not sure what is the format of it. Let me give me 1 second. Okay, so that will be the format. Okay. All right. So what it is? So you can give any name, like my package, for example, and it actually when this task upload this package to your asset library, it gives a unique ID. It's a GUID to that package, and this output variable will actually retrieve that as soon as the upload is successful. It will retrieve that, and it will pass that to the next stage. We can use that into our next stage, because obviously we will have a lot of packages. You could, and those packages may have different names depending on what time it runs and all of that. We need to know that. So I'll name I gave. Hold on, I gave my package, right? So let's change this. Package.file asset ID. I'm sorry, I have to put it there. Apologize. Wait for completion. It's enabled, and that's it. So if you follow through, what we did is we created a pipeline where first we get the input package from this, we from our build process, and then we upload it to the asset library. We generate a unique ID of that asset, and then we go to the next step where we actually apply it to an environment. We have a unique ID of that environment, and then we use that asset to apply that. And this happens depending on how you configured your build and deploy. So right now I configured it like right away. As soon as the build is successful, you can disable it and you can do it on a different schedule if you want. And similarly, if you have multiple environments, then you need to create multiple stages so that you can apply into multiple environments. Usually I say that whenever the development is done, it should be applied to a single uh, SIT environment, which we call system integration testing, or testing where the developers and the functional folks can go in and quickly validate it before we say that okay, this package should be applied now to the other environment. All right, that's how you configure it. Now, I cannot run it right now. Even if I run it, I know it's going to fail because my earlier pipeline, it was failing because of the default pools. It was unable to find this pool, and this problem, I did not have it on my other client environment, but for some reason I'm having it on my local. It's unable to find some agent. It's just Azure PS. Azure PS is basically Azure PowerShell that needs to be installed on your build environment. I have it installed, so I couldn't actually do it yesterday. That's why I cannot show you the full end-to-end package is created. But this is the process actually. If you have everything configured, these are the steps that you need to follow to create your pipeline. All right. So in summary, if you look at what we did is we, just to conclude, we started with a DevOps project. We set up the repository. We configured our LCS, configured our build environments, the pipeline, and then at the end we set up the release pipeline. In the release pipeline, we worked with 2 tasks. There is one more task available, by the way. I recently noticed that, which is adding a license. So let's see if I add another stage, and just to see what task is that. So there are many, by the way. Update model version, add licenses to deployable package. So you can explore them as well. You can make them a part of your build pipeline and explore. All right, so I am getting some questions. Can we do the deploy to environment step 2 on-prem? No. This works only for your cloud-based environments. It could be tier 1, it could be tier 2, it could be any cloud-based environments in your subscription, but not the on-prem. To set environment variable. The next question is from Will. Maybe it's a comment. Just need to set environment variable on agent or add capability to your agent to fix this issue. Yes, thanks, Will. So I haven't tried that. Do you automatically start and stop your build VM? How? So that's a good question. Right now, I have my build VM installed or spun up on my private subscription. So I have a limited budget per month, $150. So I just start it, stop it. But on client environment, you can use it comes with one build and test environment, and that you can keep it running without the worry about losing money or charging money, because that's part of your subscription. So if you configure that environment as your build test, uh, again, it's up to the team how you want to do this. I mean, I personally say that, okay, let's just, use that environment and then use other environments for different other activities like data migration. You can have a cloud hosted tier one environment. Those are the environments which you can turn on and turn off. But if you are planning to build overnight and or any other time, it's important that you have the build environment running. Is there a way to automate DB refresh from prod, UAT, dev through Azure pipeline? Any good material? I don't know the answer to that. I know that when they initially released this task last year, the upload task. So they released these tasks last year, one in January 2019, uh, which was only the upload. And that task supported uploading databases and taking back databases. But later on, I think for some reason, they don't support it anymore. As of now, I don't see any task to refresh it. I think it's a good idea to post because database refresh is something that many organizations do. There are certain other ways to do DB backups and restore, but those requires more of a manual PowerShell scripting or other kind of SQL scripting to create the backups on a schedule and upload it and then apply it. But I'm not aware of anything in Azure DevOps. I don't think there is anything available in Azure DevOps. What else? What is the best branching strategy for automate build process in FinOps, especially for multiple developers? I don't want to overcomplicate my branching strategy. I always go with 2 branches. I will say, okay, dev branch where all the development is happening, and the next you can call it a main branch or a release branch. And that's usually I do whenever I release, unless you have a client where you have a multiple models are being built, and there has to be a good reason for that. For example, you have development happening in finance and procurement module, and then for some reason the organization decides, I want HR in a completely separate release cycle, in a completely separate, or HR extensions in a completely separate model. For that, I would say, okay, you have to have a multiple branching, means multiple, like having a one dev branch and then a release branch, and then have another for the HR. But overall, I will always go with 2 branches. You have a dev branch where all the development is happening, and as soon as you guys are ready to release, you move the code, you integrate your all the code from dev branch to the main branch or a release branch. You can name it however you want to name it after all the bug fixes, and that's where you create your final package to promote to the UAT. All right, I think we are almost on time. Thank you. I really appreciate you got a time to attend my session. What's next?
Thank you, Fahad. Again, we can't get enough of the steps involved for the build pipelines, and as well as the configurations for LCS for FinOps. Again, it's very different. Well, it's not very different, but there are differences. So as well as the behavior of build servers. So the challenges that you have in FinOps is related to the build server, which we don't have the same challenges that you may face when it comes to the limitations that you have during development. So thanks for obviously addressing those. So that's really good.
Yes,
as
and
well as
I'm hoping that in future we will
sorry,
have
Fahad, go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, I'm hoping that in future we won't have those challenges, because once we move to the Azure Service Fabric in our underlying architecture, we would have everything running on cloud. We won't be dependent on build environment anymore. So
Spot
fingers
on, spot
crossed.
on. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, yep. So it's obviously all work in progress, and it's great to see that you managed to get that working. So, yep. So obviously we're now preparing for the next session. Who is Mohammed Radwan, who is actually a very famous Azure DevOps MVP. So his expertise is DevOps, and so he is, one of the leading experts in DevOps, especially for the Microsoft community. Here in the UK, he's doing all his efforts towards DevOps. He's got a really famous blog and YouTube channel. He covers literally nearly all the scenarios when it comes to DevOps. He does have a session on how to source control everything using CI/CD pipelines in Azure workloads. So, without further ado, Mohammed Radwan.
Okay, thank you, Raz, for the great introduction. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let me share my screen and let me know when you can see it.
So yes, so we still have 3 minutes before you officially begin. So
Mhm.
if you have anything that you want to share about what you're doing with the community, because you are doing so much, I think now is a good time to kind of get it out to the world, really.
Okay, I started, it's like a new community. Um, 3 months ago, 3 months ago, talking about it's called the Cloud DevOps, Cloud DevOps Visions, where it aims to help people learning DevOps and cloud. So I have some open source project which try to implement the best practices, and we got some people joining, try to contribute to the GitHub project. So this is something still new.
Wow, I've not heard about this. So please